We're going to start off with Chris Kelly. He's with Barber Beach Cleaning. Barber Beach. What is it? Y'all got a longer name than that. It's some German name.
No. That's the other.
That's Beach Tech. That's right. Never mind. I mixed the other guy. Y'all are just Barber Equipment, right?
We're all American here.
All right. That's Chris Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We do a number of these types of presentations. Usually we go out and we try to sell, and obviously there are a number of people that are probably looking at us in this portion of the presentations thinking that we are here to make money off of your problem. That's the case. And the reality of it is, with entrepreneurship, whether it's American, German, whatever, if there is a problem and there's money to be made off of it, somebody's probably going to come up with a machine that can do it. I do not think that we have that machine. And the purpose of my visit this week was to come down and listen to what people had to say down here, report back to the guys that we have in our factory, and see if we can come up with a machine that'll address the needs and the concerns that you have here. Your conditions here are relatively unique, and what I'm going to do with my presentation is, rather than go through our usual sales pitch about how we make our machines and what they can do, I'm going to share photos of my trips in various places and see if I can't help with the educational process. I've been doing this for 25 years. I first came to Texas, I think, in 1984 when we were selling equipment, so I am familiar with the area. I'm certainly familiar with the way beaches are cleaned in this area. What you do down here and what you call raking is a lot different than what most people do on their beaches. And of course, every location is unique, but there's basically three different types of beach cleanings: scraping, raking, and sifting. Now, what I call raking is literally going out on the beach with a mechanical rake, lifting the debris or the sargassum into a container and removing it from the beach. What we just saw in that photo is kind of an interesting presentation on using a loader or a standard rake, and we'll touch on that in just a second. And pushing a lot of weed and pushing a lot of sand around. That's a little bit different than what we do. So I've been doing this, like I said, for quite a while. I can't help but use the term raking. When I say raking, please think about mechanical raking, lifting the debris off the beach rather than pushing it around. There are some hybrids out there that do some raking and sifting at the same time. And again, the audience here, I'm pretty cautious about not going into a lot of detail about sifting, because I don't think it's something that's necessary down here, and I don't think, particularly with this audience, it would be well received. This is what I call a static rake or a York rake, and this device, this is actually a French-made product. If you go to France, you see a lot of these on the beaches over there. Not necessarily because it works great, but because it's a lot cheaper than most of the other products that are out there. Parked next to it over here is a standard sifting unit that they manufacture, the same company, but the difference in price is about $10,000 US and $50,000 US. So budgets, of course, drive a lot of the decisions that are made relating to beach cleaning. This is our standard model. This is called a Model 600 HD. And this is unit, I've tried to run a little bit of video here just to show you what I was talking about. What stainless steel tines that are mounted on a bar flight conveyor. The conveyor rotates, picks up the debris as the unit skims along the surface. The debris is elevated to a hopper at the rear, and then the hopper can be raised to a height of 9 feet and dumped into trucks, dumpsters, or trailers. You have relatively unique conditions here in Texas in that you are allowed to dump on or against the law in most of the rest of the U.S. And also, obviously, the conditions here is you're removing primarily organic material as opposed to man-made litter, which makes it a little bit easier to use some of the techniques that are used here. But again, that's the way we clean the beach with our machines. The next question that always comes up is, stainless steel tines. We've seen these. How are they going to hold up over time? I wanted to throw in a couple of photos. This is actually a photo of a beach in North Carolina where they did a renourishment. And similar to one of the speakers this morning, this is right off of the Beaufort Inlet, and they approached them and said, hey, we're going to pump the inlet. Would you like some nice sand on your beach? And what they wound up with is a lunar landscape. And unfortunately for them, it's not only the surface area there, but it was right through the entire strata that wound up with an awful lot of rock. And again, we try to show some of these photos to kind of suggest to people that working with the unit on rock areas is certainly a more harsh environment than being out here with the seaweed. The seaweed is actually something that's relatively easy for the tines, which are shown right over the edge of the hopper here. This photo is actually from Dade County, where again they did a nourishment. And they pumped sand from a capture site about 2 miles off, and they wound up with rocks that, that's a beer can. They wound up with rocks the size of, basketballs on their beach that needed to be removed. So the nourishment is, again, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. Sometimes these nourishment projects are not everything they're cracked up to be. But again, to be blunt about it, it's often a business opportunity for companies like ourselves. Yes?
What did you guys do with the rock?
The rock was dumped into dump trucks, and they were able to truck that rock to landfills. So some of the other places that they removed, there are a lot of beaches that have primarily rock or shell, and sometimes if it's clean, relatively clean debris, it's been used for roadways, it's been used for revetments. That type of rock there, obviously there was very little man-made debris. You could use that for other applications, supporting groins and that type of thing. That's not what they did in Dade County. In Florida, we can talk about it a little bit more at the end in the question time or offline. Every county in Florida handles their beach maintenance differently. Dade County, the next one up is Broward County. Broward County does things completely differently than Miami and Miami-Dade County. This is kind of what I would call a typical weed application. And we went out there, cleaned this beach. Again, normally this photo gets some oohs and ahs from people that are interested in buying beach cleaners. Again, I'm not naive with the audience that we have here. That beach right there probably does not elicit the type of response that we normally get when we're dealing with town councils and people who want the beach cleaned as a recreational resource. So whether you want that type of thing done, again, is the big question that I've been trying to listen to here this week. This is sea lettuce. This is in Massachusetts, Connecticut. Tasked to pick it up. This type of seaweed obviously is quite a bit different than the Sargassum. It actually makes relatively good fertilizer. And back in the day, going back to the 70s, early 80s, it used to be used quite often for fertilizer. The volume has gotten to the point even up there where there's just too much of it. So, some of it is a little bit of a good thing for fertilizer purposes, but the science up there directly correlates to the increased use of fertilizers washing into the rivers and some of the watersheds, impacting. This is actually the Long Island Sound just south of the Housatonic River. This is a mesh section. The question often comes up, how do you go out in the water? How do you use the equipment in the water? The equipment is designed to survive in the water, stainless steel tines, hardware, galvanized frame, that type of thing. But we also make a perforated conveyor, which is part of the hybrid system that allows the unit to do some raking and sifting at the same time. I'll be honest with you that very few people want to go out in the water and try to pick it up because just as, most logical people would realize trying to do it here, you could do it in the morning and by the afternoon, you would have very little to show for your efforts. But some people are willing to do it. So this is something you're more familiar with, and this is Fort Lauderdale, Florida. And I heard somebody this morning say, well, they don't get the kind of weed, on the east coast of Florida that you guys get. Well, they do, but the issue is how often it washes up. This type of event with this volume of weed in Fort Lauderdale probably only happens 2 or 3 times a year. 1 year it might be 5 times, 1 year it might be once. It has everything to do with the prevailing winds, what type of storm they have, and also the tide. Fort Lauderdale uses 4 of our machines on a daily basis to go out and clean the beach. And to attack this volume of weed, they do bring out front loaders. So they'll use the front loaders to get the majority of it down to the last 2-3 inches. Then they'll come through with the surf rakes, the Barber surf rakes, and clean up the rest of the debris. Again, the key is to try to get it done as quickly as possible, but also leave as much sand as possible behind. Fort Lauderdale's kind of the standard Atlantic beach where whatever comes off the beach has got to go to a landfill. And accepting organic material at landfills is becoming more and more of an issue. So believe it or not, it's easier to get rid of a rubber tire in most landfills that we're associated with these days than getting rid of organic material that's going to create methane. One of the things I wanted to kind of throw out from my experience, and I think Dewey alluded to it this morning in kind of a subtle way. In Europe, where we sell about half of our equipment domestically, half of it we sell internationally. Most of the international sales do go into Europe. And in Europe, in most places, they actually use a 3-tiered convention to determine how they are going to maintain the beaches. They'll have urban beaches, recreational beaches, and natural beaches. The terminology changes from one location to the next. And the gentleman I was sitting with at lunch today threw out the terms, Category 1, Category 2, Category 3, which is probably very similar. And what I'm suggesting is there are certain beaches that are just inundated with people, inundated with trash, volume, and those beaches are termed urban beaches. They're beach cleaned on a daily basis. Then you've got beaches that are kind of in the middle that have more moderate use, that might have a beach cleaning every other day, every third day, that type of thing. And then there are beaches that are natural beaches that are left alone completely. And as Dewey mentioned this morning, he asked the question about how much of the coastline was developed versus undeveloped. Most of the countries that we deal with in Europe, they're very particular about that. In England, for example, they have an organization, it's called Tidy Britain, but it's basically their environmental agency over there that oversees the beaches. And they're very particular each year at looking at how much of their coastline is considered urban, how much is recreational, and how much is natural. And at least while, in the 20 years that I've been going over there for conferences, generally the number is less than 3% of their beaches is cleaned mechanically or maintained either for urban beaches or recreational beaches. And again, that's, it's all relative to where you are and how much, natural beach is around a particular area, whether that's, relevant to the botany of the area. This is a little more common. I threw a couple of slides in, and I went back and tried to, again, not make this a big sales pitch, but pull out some photos that I've taken over the years of various places that have weed problems. This is down in the Dominican Republic. They're using a 600 HD surf rake to clean the beach, and that's kind of a before and after. They did specifically request that the tide line or the rack line be left alone. Now, again, you can see that there's not an awful lot of visible marine life. Certainly after listening to Amy speak yesterday, I was much more cognizant of walking down to the beach and looking at how many birds and looking at some of the animal life that was down there. This particular island has great diving about 30 meters off the beach. I did a beach dive there that was just phenomenal. And I think when you have that kind of a reef system, you don't necessarily have as much life at the tide line. But I give these guys credit. They were cognizant of that, and I don't think there was a government entity motivating them. I think it was more along the lines of they're actually selling $1 million condos back in behind those trees, and they want to have some, an ecotourism component. This, I think, is more of what you're familiar with here in some of the pictures in Texas. That's a lot of folks' idea of a beach cleaner that was working on this particular beach. This one was in Mallorca, Spain, and I always kind of show those photos to people in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. They don't impress people here in Texas because you have, similar volumes of weed. It's not Sargassum. It's much more of a stringy eelgrass type weed that they have. But again, the volumes that they're dealing with are very significant. All of that weed actually gets trucked off the beach. They stockpile it, then they come back in with big loaders and trucks and get rid of it. And again, I know a lot of people are kind of waiting to hear about the panacea that is going to solve the problem. And we kind of joked about it a little bit over lunch. I've been lucky enough to travel to 22 countries around the globe, visiting beaches. It's not a bad job to have. I've seen most of everything that's out there that's available. The deal is that there are very few places that have the volume of weed that you have here in Texas. If there were more, then there would be people like ourselves that would be stepping up to develop equipment that would deal with it, because people would be looking to capitalize on that. One of the few places in the U.S. that has an awful lot of weed is Key West, Florida. And if you've ever been down there and visited, there's one major beach down there, Smathers Beach. They get inundated with weed on pretty much a daily basis. And what they're doing down there, they used to have an enormous problem where they would remove the weed from the beach, and then they trucked it 300 miles north to the mainland to dump it. Now, one of the guys who had the contract to clean the beach was actually pretty smart, and he found out that he could get a composting permit which would allow him to take the weed, dump it in this area, and what he told me he had to do down here is he didn't put down a geotextile, but he put down about 3 inches of crushed gravel, then put some what passes for topsoil down there on top of it, and what he's done is he's windrowed the debris that he takes off the beach. He's found that the weed reduces in volume by about a 5-to-1 ratio if you let it sit for a couple of weeks. And then he actually found another guy down there who is so desperate for any type of topsoil, because again, this is Key West, it's basically a coral atoll. He's been able to take this weed, mix it with some of the crushed coral, some of the topsoil that they have, and use it in gardening. So he basically gives it away. But for the guy who's responsible for removing it from the beach, and I didn't get any photos, beach photos, I just thought it might be interesting to see this operation. Instead of trucking it 300 miles north and all the costs associated with that, now he gives it away, and he's done with his problem. So his profit margin jumped pretty dramatically. In kind of putting together the presentation and listening to the other speakers, I thought I would help kind of explain from a manufacturer's point of view, why the equipment may not be there that everybody's looking for. And the periodic nature of the problem down here, I was sent here to kind of listen, find out what the real issues are and how bad the problem was. And I spoke to one of the guys in our factory today, and he said, well, what are you learning? And I'm like, well, I'm learning some sargassum is good, some people like a lot, some people don't like a lot. I learned why my wife shaves her underarms the other day. So there have been some interesting things. But, his big question was, well, is there weed on the beach? And I took some photos yesterday, and I emailed them up there. And from our perspective, our factory's based out of Connecticut. They look at the beach and they say, hey, what a mess. And I said, well, actually, it's not really that bad. And, I took some photos today of, families out there, people out there. And I said, look, I don't think it's that big a problem. And listening to the presentation yesterday about 35-year events and that type of thing, if you're a manufacturer, you want to hear that there's a big problem that happens all the time that people are going to throw money at. And I'm not hearing that, and that's not to say that that we're not going to to see about investigating possibilities. But I think again, until folks here in Texas decide how much beach cleaning they want to do and how intrusive they're willing to allow the methods that are being used, it's going to be real difficult for you to find folks from our industry that are going to jump into this. Capacity is the biggest issue. We can go out there, we can pick the stuff up, but our hopper capacity is about 2.2 cubic yards, and you can go 5 yards down the beach and fill that up. So that's the biggest problem we're facing. And then obviously the disposal issue. Again, as a manufacturer, what we think about is, all right, what we pick up, we have to figure out a way to get rid of it. Normally, we want to dump it into a truck, which requires structurally building a piece of equipment that's very heavy duty. If we can dump it on the ground, which may be allowed here back in the dunes, the design of the equipment could be radically different and much cheaper for us to manufacture. So these are some of the things that that I've come up with the last couple of days that I'm going to go back and present to my folks. We want a piece of equipment that's going to be heavy duty. It's got to survive down here. I remember the first time I came down here in '84, I saw a 3-year-old surf rake, one of our pieces of equipment, that looked like it was about 20 years old because the corrosion is just astronomical. So if you don't hot dip galvanize, if you don't put stainless steel, even when you do, you're going to run into some issues. But as a manufacturer, if we are going to build something, we're going to tool up to build it correctly. We're going to CAD draw it, design it properly. So it's got to be heavy duty, but it's also got to be lightweight. One of the things I don't hear down here, which I hear everywhere else in the world, Florida, you can't put a piece of equipment, the things that I see out on the beach out here with the trucks and even vehicles, it just would never fly in Florida. I don't know if it was Tony or somebody kind of took a shot at New Jersey on the first day. New Jersey is an interesting place now. New Jersey is one of the most progressive states when it comes to environmental concerns. You would never be able to remove sand, anything more than 5% of sand from the beach. You'd never be able to dump into the dune line. You'd never be able to put a dump truck out on the beach. 10 psi is the magic number in Florida, and it seems to be adopted in a number of other places. In other words, when you put a piece of equipment out there on the beach, you cannot put down more than 10 psi of ground pressure for compaction issues. Turtle issues are a very big deal over there. So some of the things that go on here, in a way it makes it easier to get the beach clean, but again, we're trying to, if we are going to design a piece of equipment, and one of the reasons I showed the other photos is I want a piece of equipment that's going to work in Key West. I want a piece of equipment that's going to work in Majorca. We've got conditions over in the northern part of Africa where there's an awful lot of weed that some people would be interested. So we're looking at a little bit broader market to go after. The idea, again, also would be to remove less than 5% of sand. Using the York rake method, it's inevitable as you drag that rake down the beach, even if it's grabbing the sargassum, it's going to be pulling a wave of sand in front of it. And the gentleman this morning that showed the John Deere tractor pulling the weed up to the fore-dune and then using the front bucket to load it into the dune, you're going to be loading all that sand and weed into the dune. And I've kind of learned here this week, I thought people liked that idea here. I thought that was part of the plan, was to build up the dune. Now I'm kind of hearing some of the science suggesting that it's not necessary to get the fertilizer benefit from weed by having it mixed with sand, and certainly the whole concept of building up the fore-dune to the point that you're narrowed your beach, and limited your recreational resource. I've learned a little bit more that that clearly the folks in this room, at least, that's not something it sounds like anybody wants to do. They're looking for different methods to avoid that. We'll talk about large capacity, dumping directly into the trucks. I think the jury's out, at least in my mind. I'm interested to talk to some of the public works guys about that needs to be done. And then do it in a method where we can clean acres rather than, small distances out there. And then the other interesting thing is this whole idea of focusing on the older sargassum. And this is a trend, again, we saw it in the Dominican Republic photos. We see this in Europe in a lot of places where some places have us come in and all they have us do is do the tined line. Other places, that rack line, the swash area, is an area that basically we've been told, leave it alone. Clean the upper part of the beach, satisfy the tourists for the most part, but leave the lower part of the beach alone. And again, that's not for me to answer. That's certainly something that I think we're going to find county to county. Now, the next couple of photos are artist renderings of equipment ideas that we've come up with. This is basically just a variation on the equipment that utilizes some existing technology that's out there to add on a much larger capacity hopper. It's a ground dump version, which one of the reasons it never got off the table at our place is that we thought ground dumping would be something that most people would not be interested in. And if you have to truck the debris that you take off the beach somewhere else, then clearly that is a problem. But if you can take it up into the back stack or the mid stack or wherever you're allowed to dump the sargassum, then possibly that idea is something that is going to find a home. The other big idea that we've come up with, and we've gone through a little bit of prototype testing, and please forgive the drawing because somebody in our office needs a little help with their Photoshop, but the idea is basically to utilize the existing raking technology, which does a nice job of picking up the weed without picking up sand, but side casting it into a truck. And again, you know, in some ways you're very lucky here that the beach is as soft as it is, that you can put trucks out there, that it doesn't seem to be any legalities against putting the trucks out there, so you have an access point to get stuff off the beach. Obviously, we've seen the photos of trucks. This is a shot of a hopper, a trailer that they use in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Myrtle Beach, on rare occasions, kind of like Fort Lauderdale, on rare occasions they'll have sargassum issues up there on the beach. This trailer basically sits in their yard most of the year, but when they do have large sargassum events, then they bring this 18 cubic yard trailer out there on the beach. They load directly into it with their beach cleaners. And this unit is hydraulic over electric, meaning basically you can raise it and dump it. Now they do truck all this stuff off, so they basically take it off, they dump into a parking lot, then they come back at a later date, they load out trucks, and they take it all off to a landfill. But again, it's just another alternative. I assume folks may have thought of that here, but the capacity of a trailer like that is significantly less than a dump truck. It's much less intrusive on the beach as far as ground pressure, which is why it's used down there. And that's about a $12,000 trailer compared to, you know, some of the dump trucks that obviously run a lot more money. So, you know, in conclusion, basically what we're trying to do is, you know, come in, listen, learn as much as we can, do what we can to gauge the level of interest that there may be for equipment. And what we're really looking for is a couple of partners here in Texas that say, hey, look, we're pretty serious about getting this stuff off the beach. If you can build us a machine that does A, B, and C, we'll be interested. And then we will build it, and we'll bring it in, and we'll test it here on the beaches in Texas. That's our website, just in case you want to look. I did leave some literature on the back table in the back corner over there. And I thank you very much for listening.
Your little forks there, do they don't go down into the sand? They mostly are kind of running on top?
For the application that we're talking about here, yes. They would be basically using a skimming technique. They would not be plowing through the sand. There are places with dry sand, fine sand, that you can do that if that's what you're looking for, but you know, in the applications here in Texas, I would use much more of a skimming technique.
So it wouldn't go down and get all the little under the sand critters?
No, not unless, you know, if you set it deeper, certainly you would impact that, you know, that habitat. But the weed here, for the most part, is sitting up on the top. So I think you could do a pretty effective job without going down into the sand.
About the 10 psi, the reason that's probably not considered important here is these beaches are very fine grained, which is why the beach is so firm and so easy for cars to drive on it. So if the sand has been recently dampened as opposed to dried out for a really long time, you can even ride a narrow-tired bicycle on it. So the tire pressure wouldn't be a factor here, I don't think.
Yeah, I think it's mostly a turtle issue in Florida. They're very, very much concerned about the turtles, and we've modified our machines over the years so that the weight of the equipment and the tire size on the unit gets us in under that 10 psi, that magic number they have there. We also make a device, it's not shown here, but it's basically a tail drag that goes behind the unit that smooths out all the tire marks. Because not only is 10 psi the standard, the other major standard there is half-inch divots left by anything that's out on the beach. Most of the turtle nests in Florida, as I'm sure some of you are aware, there used to be a program where they would move the turtle nest, they would incubate them, and they would release. The trend, certainly as I've seen it over the years, is to leave the turtle nests in place and let them hatch naturally on the beach, stake them off, GPS them, try to protect them as much as possible, but leave them in place. But the issue then is that the hatchlings need to be able to get back into the water. And to do that, they want the beach as level as possible, so they do allow, they basically put a tail drag behind the unit so that as it's going along, everything is leveled and smooth, so there's a clear path for the turtles to get back into the ocean. Yes, sir?
Have you experimented with any equipment that would treat seaweed like snow and throw it?
Yeah, we have not. I saw those photos yesterday of the peat being blown into a pile. I'm not a botanist, so peat is one thing. The weed that they're picking up down in Key West is either, the euphemism is eelgrass, turtle grass. It's very fine. It breaks down pretty quickly. And something like that, I think you could run it through a snowblower and do a pretty good job of moving it that way. Whether you can do that with sargassum or not, I don't know. And I tell you, the other issue, which as a manufacturer means a big deal to us, if you're going to run something that's, been in the salt water through a mechanism like a snowblower, I really wonder how long it's going to last. It might hold up over time, but as a manufacturer's rep, that's the first thing I saw when I thought about that stuff going through there. And there are a lot of other beach cleaners out there in the world. Some are galvanized, some are not. Some are aluminum, some are not. Some have stainless steel, some are not. And in our industry, you can either buy cheap and have it made out of steel, or you can put the time and the money into the quality of the components so that it lasts for a much longer interval. So that's a long-winded. We haven't tried it, and I don't think that we are going to go that direction. Yes, sir?
What's the possibility of separating sargassum and some of the plastic?
Yeah, he asked about what's the odds of separating plastics, man-made debris from the quick answer is there's no easy way to do it. I've seen some places where they'll actually go back to a dump site that's close to the DPW and dump the stuff out and try to pick it out. Some places will pick by hand ahead of time, as I think is done down here in a lot of places, so that when you do remove the seaweed, it's primarily organic material, and it does seem to be a cyclical event where some days the stuff that comes up on the beach seems to be almost all seaweed, and then other times, I don't know if it's storm related, there's a lot of plastic, there's a lot of flotsam and jetsam mixed in there, but there's no way mechanically that we are aware of to differentiate between a big clump of sargassum and some guy that left his McDonald's bag out there.
If there's any chance of making ethanol out of it?
Yeah, now you're getting into some things that are a little bit beyond our expertise. I do not know.
Touch on methane.
Well, that's going into the landfills, and it's interesting. Again, 20 years ago when I was doing this early on, you could bring the organic material into the landfill, but they didn't want the inorganic material. Now it's the opposite, and it gets to be a very expensive proposition for most places. We do contract cleaning, our company, up in the Connecticut, Rhode Island, New York area. We do it more for R&D than to make money. We of course, make some money while we're doing it, but we want to test out new tines, new sprockets, that type of thing. And I only bring that up because we used to go out and, you'd bring a 40-yard dumpster in and you'd dump into the dumpster and, you'd have it trucked away for $800 and that would be that. Well, nowadays, depending on the different jurisdictions that are involved, it could be $1,000, could be $2,000, could be $3,000 to take that dumpster away. So we basically tell people, look, if you want us to come in and clean, you put a dumpster in there, we'll dump into it, and you do whatever you want with it when you're done. It's become that expensive.
We often get what they call stream cut channels as a way to go back and creating a very uneven surface, and many of the machines just don't work. They need a smooth surface.
Yeah. I can't really go back to see if I can go back to the first photo. One of the interesting things about our machine, and one of the things we like to tout when we're trying to sell it, is that the front of the machine here is what's called a mold board. And I've been doing this for a while, so I understand who my audience is. Normally, that part of the machine right there is down in the sand, plowing through the sand. And there are plenty of people, if you go to Fort Lauderdale and go out and look at their beach, they've got that part of the machine down in the sand. It's got wings that come out to the side to a 7-foot cleaning width, and it's going to level the beach as it cleans. It's going to knock down sandcastles, fill in holes. That's the way most people want to clean the beach. I don't think that was necessarily what the audience here was looking for, so I picked out a photo where we are using more of a skimming technique that we discussed earlier. So the quick answer is, with our machine, because it's a raking style machine, not a sifter. Most of the sifters need basically a pretty level cutting edge. If you hit a sandcastle or something like that and it goes up on the screen, kind of like the French machine that I showed a little earlier, you need a certain amount of time for sand to sift through, particularly if it's wet sand. So the answer is, if you have washouts and things like that, the surf rake is going to be able to fill those in to a certain extent.
It's not so much filling them in as getting the stuff that's in those channels out.
Yeah, well, the way the unit is going to operate, the guy who's operating it has a 3-point hitch behind it, which raises and lowers the machine. So as he's going down into that hole, he's going to use the 3-point lever to kind of move the machine down a little bit to scoop the stuff out of there. Again, without seeing the actual swell. I actually find more of that in some of the beaches down in South America, Mexico, where they don't have as sophisticated stormwater runoff systems that we have. And, anybody who's been to Acapulco knows at the end of the road they have literally big iron bars that are about an inch thick, and that's to keep cars and things literally from washing down the streets from the mountainside out into the beach. And there's always big washouts between the access points to the beach after a major storm. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Very good.